So, here we are again with another tedious post about racism. I desperately wish I could talk about something else. It's worth pointing out that I started this channel in order to try and highlight the invidious and pernicious spread of state-sponsored and warrantless surveillance of the law-abiding public. But so many things have gotten in the way and deflected me from my core concern. Brexit, the anti-democratic elite, the unspeakable horror of the rape gangs, Islamist terrorism, the illusion that is coronavirus, and lastly, the destructive whirlwind of Black Lives Matter. With so many attacks on our decent and glorious society coming from all directions, it has been impossible to keep the focus on the quiet, sinister and relentless liberty-destroying spectre of surveillance. With everything else that is going on, even I have to admit that, in the great scheme of things, it really doesn't seem that important. It is important, I remain convinced, and we will pay the price in the future for not thinking about it enough. Because one thing is for sure, those who want to pry into every single crevice of our private lives will continue to do their dystopian work, whilst we are all busy trying to stop Black Lives Matter from burning the entire house down. Make no mistake, the surveillance control freaks are aiming to construct a world with zero privacy. But like a spoiled brat that continues to prevent his parents from ever having even one evening to themselves, the totally misnamed organisation Black Lives Matter continues to demand our undivided attention. This current lull in the madness, which hopefully signals that Black Lives Matter might well have overplayed their hand and actually shot their bolt. If that is the case, this is to be welcomed, because to declare that it had become tedious is somewhat of an understatement. So in this lull, let's try and head this thing off at the pass, in the probably vain hope that we won't have to continue to flog this horse any further, if I can mix and brutalise my metaphors. So if we must, and it appears that we must, let's discuss racism, and let the joy be unconfined. Despite my opinion that continuing to discuss racism makes it worse and not better, which Black Lives Matter have done a sterling job of lately, there doesn't seem actually to be anything more that we can agree on than we might have thought 5 years ago. Take the concept of racism itself. 5 years ago, almost everybody would have agreed that it was a bad thing. Not so today. As I mentioned in a video a few weeks back, the insistence that everything is racist and must be torn down has resulted in huge audiences for people who posit that racism isn't actually a bad thing after all, and is instead just a normal and rational expression of a human being's innate in-group preference. So well done Ash Sarkar, Afriwa Hearst, Professor Kahindi Andrews, Owen Jones, Yasmin Alabai Brown, Robin DiAngelo and all the rest of the spiteful race baiters whose livelihoods depend on the continuation of racial division. And bravo Black Lives Matter. Bravo. But as bored as I am discussing racism, there are things that I think we need to address. Now, I'm not about to take the knee or start interrogating my whiteness or any kind of tomfoolery like that. But I just thought that I should just touch upon negative experiences that I've heard about and to imagine how that feels. Racial slurs are not the end of the world, but they are hurtful, and not to acknowledge that is to dismiss it. Back in the springtime, there is a place that I often take Mrs. X with the dog, so that we can look at the bluebells. It is an astonishingly beautiful place, and the bluebells appear quite literally as a carpet, so dense are they. But this patch of woodland is on private land, and a couple of times over the years an officious little shit has appeared as if from nowhere to tell us that, and by implication that we need to bugger off. It's not serious, and it is, I suppose, land that doesn't belong to me, although being able to herd to oneself such a glory of nature seems particularly mean-spirited. But it does kind of ruin your day. And this wasn't personal, but it still left a nasty taste in the mouth. Basically, he was saying, we don't want you around here. But imagine when it is personal. Mrs. X went to quite a posh school when she was younger. I know, I married him up above my station. And because of the international flavour of the place, there were quite a number of her friends who were from foreign climes. She had friends from America, Malaysia, Ghana and Japan, amongst others. And when they used to go to the local village to seek out local boys to ignore, sometimes a car would come past and those would shout, "Go home," or "Go back to your own country." Now, as it happens, they did have their own countries to go back to, and so didn't fall into the trap, as the archetypal racist does, of assuming that foreign looking means actually foreign. But from a passing car, the target for this low-level racism was obviously the darkest of her friends, the one from Ghana, and she knew it. Now, there probably wasn't an awful lot of malice behind the heckling, and in some cases it might even have been a variation of pulling the pigtails of the girl you fancy. But it was crude, and according to Mrs. X, it was hurtful. In fact, the hurt was probably massively off the scale compared with its intent. And in instances like that, you have a microcosm of the perception of racism. White people, on the whole, believe racism is negligible. Black people, on the other hand, being more sensitive to the hurtfulness of it, tend to believe that it is commonplace. The truth is it's probably somewhere between the two. But that was 35 years ago. I can't imagine anyone saying such a thing nowadays, even from a passing car. And that is progress. A mixed race bloke I follow on Twitter has said that if a stranger called him a black bastard today, he'd just think it was funny. He said it would be no weirder than if somebody had accosted him with the Shakespearean equivalent of foul blackamoor. So outdated would it seem. That's also progress. But we shouldn't underestimate the hurtfulness of such language, particularly in the impressionable teenage years. And for the particularly sensitive, that can turn into a complex that can last a lifetime. And I think for those race vultures I listed previously, I suspect that is what drives them. The early imprint of a throwaway racist remark has coloured their entire lives and left a lasting antipathy, even a hatred of white people. But I don't know that. I'm just guessing. But it would explain a lot. Because what has always puzzled me is this assumption, this default position of attributing everything through the prism of race, of skin colour, of otherness, of visible difference. This insistence that everything and everybody is racist just doesn't, to me at least, ring true. Most people, even casual racists, just don't have time for this. Sure, they might harbour some lazy and learned prejudices inherited from parents and grandparents, but it's usually quite easily, with familiarity and reasonable conduct, to overcome these. But most people don't have the time, let alone the inclination, to get themselves into a frothing lather of incendiary race hate. Now I understand that the narrative is of systemic or structural racism. The Black Lives Matter types, as a kind of poisoned olive branch, tend to acknowledge that white people don't mean to be racist. They just can't help it. They just can't help hating black people, try as they might. The phrase damning with faint praise comes to mind. White people, it seems, are either wicked or stupid. They're either honest racists or naive fools. The naive fools have no agency incapable of going against their racist indoctrination. The only ones that have agency are the open racists, and the honesty of the open racist is often applauded by these amateur psychoanalysts, conveniently forgetting that when honest racists were in charge, black people were in chains. But nevertheless, there are some issues that do disproportionately affect black people, especially in America, that perpetuate a negative feedback loop that keeps them down. Not being an American, I don't know a great deal about this. Suffice to say that there is a perverse culture of incentivisation within the police who can get an easy collar by searching any young black man in certain neighbourhoods, which will reflect well on their arrest record. Similar things seem to happen in the courts and also in the prison service, who earn more the more inmates they have. There also seems to be a difference in severity between the illegal drugs white people take compared to those that black people favour. Quite how anyone can get away with this, legislatively speaking, is beyond me, but it does seem to happen. And the upshot of this is that there are whole neighbourhoods devoid of young men who are serving prison sentences for very minor drug offences. The remaining men in the neighbourhood now have the pick of the women and can have several girlfriends and then father numerous children who grow up in single-parent households with no father figure, and so the whole cycle begins again. Black conservatives almost unanimously blame the lack of fathers for the troubles of the black communities above all other issues. So there is a problem, and it is very short-sighted to ignore it. If America is ever to get to grips with its racial problems, it needs to deal with that. Legalising drugs for all sorts of reasons, both moral and practical, is a no-brainer as far as I'm concerned. But there's no better reason than that. But that's America. It's not here. And although there are lots of similarities between Britain and America, they're not the same. And although we nearly always import everything that comes out of America, both good and bad, there are still enough differences that make it unfair to blame Americans' problems on us. As I mentioned in my last video, in all the prestigious and high-profile areas, black people in Britain are doing pretty well. In fact, they're doing better than they should be, strictly speaking, if we're talking representation, which is really the only reliable indicator of the success or otherwise of a particular demographic. But it seems, and I say seems, since it's much harder to find figures for such things, it seems as if ordinary black people aren't doing so well. And how do I know this? Well, because I'm told it. I'm told it by people whose entire worldview is wrapped up in this obsession with grievance. Maybe they're right. They could be. Or they could be lying. It could be that exaggerating and highlighting the issue of racism keeps certain people where they like to be, on television, with a high profile. But is racism really everywhere? Is it? Really? I've been accused recently of being unhappy or upset that black people are demanding that they are treated equally or fairly. But I'm not unhappy about that. In fact, I would demand that they be treated equally and fairly. But I just don't think that they are treated unfairly. I just don't believe it. In a kind of perverse way, I would like to think that they are treated unfairly, since it would give some credence to all these overblown protests. If I thought that black people were being mistreated, I would feel as if I could join them in solidarity in their protests. The trouble is, I just don't. Nobody, other than by unprovable anecdote, has yet to provide some actual, tangible evidence of their mistreatment. Are some people racist? Well, I would guess that there are, but there must be a whole spectrum of attitudes from not being especially sexually attracted to people of a certain race to wishing a genocide upon them. As Catherine Barbelson was saying about David Starkey after his recent comments, I think he's a racist, but he's not Hitler. But Starkey's poorly judged and irritable remarks give the lie and add fuel to those who say, there, you see, they're all like that. They're all racist underneath. They say he just slipped up, but if he wasn't a racist, those racist feelings wouldn't have been inside him in the first place, and he would never have blurted them out. And that was why Starkey's comments were so unhelpful in the current climate. They weren't unhelpful in that he revealed something about all of us white people, that we would have preferred remained hidden. That's not why they were unhelpful. They were unhelpful because, as sensible, principled and moderate voices were beginning to gain traction in their correct criticisms of Black Lives Matter's motives, and those same voices, many of them black, were touchingly defending our British society and the British people within it. His reductive and frankly dismissive comments single-handedly gifted the Black Lives Matter racists a boost when they were rapidly losing credibility. He was an idiot, and he was a particular idiot because he is a very cultured man. He should have known better. Saying damn blacks just reduce an entire group of people to the status of an irritation. That, I'm afraid, is racist. It's not as racist as saying all white people are racist, but it is racist. He hasn't done as much damage as Black Lives Matter. How could anyone? But he has done damage. He has added fuel to the fire of the ridiculous notion that when a white person is confronted with a black person, the white person's immediate, default, instinctive and knee-jerk reaction is, how can I fuck this nigger over? Is that what you really think? Is that what you think we think? How can I fuck this person over but do it without them realising that I'm racist? How can I refuse them this job and give it to a white person without them having a case against me? How can I prevent them from getting a promotion? How can I make sure that they earn less than me? How can I make sure that they don't move in next door to me? Of course, I know the argument. It's not about white people actually being nasty to black people. It's about structural or systemic or institutional racism. Oh right, I see. So even though some of you Black Lives Matter types do acknowledge that maybe white people aren't constantly repelled and disgusted by the thought of having a black person anywhere near them, we are, it seems, still secretly delighted that the infrastructure of white society is quietly doing all the heavy lifting out of sight, so that we don't have to dirty our hands with visibly doing or saying anything overtly racist. Not like that dreadful oik, Tommy Robinson. And I don't know how many times I have to say this, but I'm going to give it yet another go. White people, on the whole, don't hate you. Most white people don't really think too much about you. In that respect, I'll concede most black lives don't matter. But then neither do most white lives. But this constant insistence that we do hate you kind of suggests that there is something hateful about you. We as white people don't think this, but the behaviour of Black Lives Matter suggests that they do. And I say they because I'd like to point out that the majority of Black Lives Matter activists, neither here nor in North America, are actually black. The majority, it seems, are self-hating whites. So maybe that's it. Maybe that's the attraction. Self-hating whites and self-hating blacks all together in a self-fulfilling orgy of masochism. Normal white people don't go around seething with vicious resentment that there are human beings in their midst of a darker hue than them. And normal black people, I assume, because there's a lot of them too, don't seem to spend their whole lives obsessing over what cruelty was dished out to their great, 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 great grandparents. Because they seem to know something that you don't. That thing being that white people don't hate you. Even if it does appear that you do seem to hate yourselves.